Belfast, the Falls Road. 4:47 on a wet Tuesday afternoon in March 1981. A red Vauxhall Cavalier, 10 years old, driver's side mirror taped on with electrical tape, sits outside a betting shop. The driver, 28 years old, civilian clothes, a copy of the Belfast Telegraph folded on the passenger seat, has been parked there for 14 minutes. He is reading the racing pages. His name isn't the name on the driving licence in his wallet. The licence is itself a forgery, but so accomplished that it has cleared a routine police check twice in the past 8 months. He is a corporal in the British Army. He is on duty. He is unarmed. Across the road, in the upper window of a terraced house, a Provisional IRA active service unit is preparing a vehicle bomb. The corporal, looking down at the racing pages, has counted 3 men into that house in the past 40 minutes. He has noted the registration of the green Ford Escort that arrived at 4:12. He has photographed the back door using the rear-view mirror of his Cavalier and a compact Olympus camera held low on his lap. The film will be developed in a basement off the Holywood Road within 90 minutes of his return. By morning, his observation report and the photographs will be on the desk of the General Officer commanding Northern Ireland. The corporal belongs to a unit the British government hasn't formally acknowledged in 8 years of operations. It was raised under a document that named no unit, a Defence Council instruction issued on the 12th of October 1973, held at the National Archives under the reference DEFE 25/280, partially released in 2013. Its members are recruited from across the regular army on a single anonymous sentence posted on a notice board. Its operators carry false identities, drive unremarkable civilian vehicles, and live inside cover stories prepared at a classified establishment in Herefordshire. The Q cars. Civilian saloons with covert radios, hidden cameras, armoured panels, engine cut-off switches look exactly like the cars parked on every residential street in Belfast. It's, in its own internal documents, called 14 Intelligence Company. To the men and women in it, it's simply the detachment, the debt. By the time it's dissolved in 1997, it will have operated for 24 years across 3 geographic detachments in a conflict that cost more than 3,500 lives. Among its own dead, the unit will count somewhere in the region of 14 operators. The figure that emerges from Mark Urban's reporting in Big Boys Rules, published in 1992 and updated across his subsequent work. What distinguishes those deaths from almost every other British fatality of the Troubles is this: a significant number were never publicly attributed to 14 Intelligence Company at all. They couldn't be. The unit's covert status meant that deaths were registered to whatever cover formation the operator was nominally attached to when they died. The mechanism that made them invisible in life also made them invisible in death. The unit that became 14 Intelligence Company was the direct response to a disaster. In 1971, Brigadier Frank Kitson arrived as commander of 39 Infantry Brigade in Belfast. He was a counter-insurgency theorist who had served in Malaya, Kenya and Cyprus, who believed, from hard experience in those campaigns, that irregular conflicts were won or lost in the intelligence space before the shooting started. The military reaction force he built operated in plain clothes and civilian vehicles in teams of 2 to 4, based at Palace Barracks in Holywood. Among its assets were turned Republicans, known internally as Freds, who accompanied patrols to identify IRA members from moving cars. The MRF had genuine successes. It also had a catastrophic problem with discipline and oversight. A BBC Panorama investigation later linked the unit to 10 shootings of unarmed civilians in Belfast in 1972. Patrick McVeigh, 44 years old, was killed by MRF personnel at a junction in West Belfast on 12th of May 1972, while chatting with members of the Catholic Ex-Servicemen's Association, a veterans group, not the IRA. Multiple soldiers faced prosecution for that year's incidents. The RUC's special branch, which liaised with the unit, told the journalist Martin Dillon that MRF operations were amateurish and not tightly controlled. The political pressure in London was direct. William Whitelaw, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, was writing to Heath about the MRF in 1973, and the Provisional IRA's intelligence about the unit's structure was already comprehensive enough to be dangerous. Then came the Four-Square Laundry. In the summer of 1972, the IRA discovered that Seamus Wright, one of the Freds, had been working for British intelligence all along. Under interrogation in Crumlin Road prison, Wright gave up the details of an MRF operation running a mobile laundry service in West Belfast, collecting forensic intelligence from clothing left for cleaning in nationalist areas. On October 2, 1972, the IRA attacked the laundry van on the Twinbrook estate, killing the driver, 21-year-old sapper Ted Stewart. Simultaneously, IRA units attacked two MRF-linked offices elsewhere in the city. The Four-Square operation was finished. The MRF's cover, broader than any single operation, was finished with it. Former SA SNCO Ken Connor was part of a three-man team sent to assess what remained. His conclusion, recorded in Ghost Force, was that the group running the MRF was so out of control that it had to be disbanded at once. All three assessors reached the same recommendation independently: get rid of it, acquire the skills properly, and rebuild in a different form. Connor's summary: the result was 14 INT, the 14th intelligence company. The transition passed through several designations. The April 1974 briefing, prepared for Prime Minister Harold Wilson, classified top secret, described how in 1972 MRF operations had been brought under more centralised control and a higher standard of training achieved by establishing a special reconnaissance unit of 130 all ranks under direct command of HQNI. The SRU operated under the cover name NITAT, NI, Northern Ireland Training and Advisory Teams, appearing on paper identical to genuine training advisory teams operating in West Germany and Britain. Underneath that cover, the October 1973 Defence Council instruction had formalised the unit's existence. DEFE 25/280 authorised an organisation by declining to say what it was called. The Wilson briefing is explicit about the deliberate secrecy. The term Special Reconnaissance Unit and the details of its organisation and mode of operations had been kept secret. Over the following decade, the cover designations shifted. NITAT gave way to Intelligence and Security Group, NI, around 1978 or 1979. That in turn became 14 Intelligence and Security Company in the early 1980s, contracted in daily use to 14 Intelligence Company or 14 Intelligence. As Urban explained in Big Boy's Rules, most people who worked with the Army in Northern Ireland came to know it by that name, even when referring to activities that predated the adoption of the designation. The detachment was there before it had a name anyone could say out loud. The Army-wide recruitment notice was almost nothing by design. One sentence on a notice board. From time to time, there is a requirement for men and women to volunteer to undertake special duties of a hazardous nature in Northern Ireland. The selection and training for special duties are both rigorous and arduous. That was all. No unit name, no description of the role. Anyone who inquired was summoned to a one-day assessment, physical training, an interview, IQ tests, before receiving a letter with a location and a date, and instructions on what to bring. Secrecy about the process was part of the process. No candidate was told in advance what lay ahead, which served as a filter from the first hour. People who asked too many questions before they arrived were already demonstrating a disqualifying quality. Selection drew on SAS assessment frameworks and the Wartime Special Operations Executive. Loaded marches, navigation exercises, sleep deprivation, erratic schedules. Memory retention tasks completed directly after hard physical effort. The directing staff wore the berets of their original units, Parachute Regiment, Guards, Royal Marines, and after the unit became operational, experienced DT operators took over from the SAS personnel who had initially run the courses. The unit drew from across the services: infantry battalions, Royal Engineers, Royal Logistic Corps, Royal Tank Regiment, Royal Marines, Intelligence Corps. It recruited from all three branches: Army, Navy, Air Force, which is reflected in the colours on the unofficial unit insignia, orange and green, separated by 3 stripes. Women were eligible from the outset. The WRAC DT, formerly the Women's Royal Army Corps Detachment, was operational from 1974 and constituted the only British military formation in which women served in frontline conditions at that time. The operational rationale was specific and proven within the first years of deployment. The Provisional IRA's security culture had been built around a threat model that didn't include female surveillance operators. A woman could sit in a car on a Republican street, walk past a target address, or hold an observation point in a location that would compromise a man within minutes, and do it invisibly, because no one's eyes were looking for her in that role. Male and female operator pairs conducted surveillance as apparent couples. 2 men in a car parked on the same street looked like a surveillance car. A man and woman looked like they were waiting for someone. The pseudonymous memoir, One Up, published in 1995 by a former WRAC detected operator writing as Sarah, describes the operational reality from the inside. The unit's command acknowledged its authenticity. Academic papers published in 2024 and 2025 on invisible bodies and non-combatants on the front line are the beginning of a formal scholarly account of what these women did and what it cost them. After selection, formal training ran to approximately 6 months. The curriculum was comprehensive: advanced surveillance from vehicles and on foot, covert photography including infrared night work, electronic eavesdropping device placement, lockpicking and key copying, house entry without detection. Advanced driving courses covered sustained high-speed pursuit, skid recovery, controlled crashes, anti-ambush drills, using a vehicle as a weapon, and the specific technique of disabling brake lights by switch to allow covert night pickups and drop-offs. Weapons training covered the Browning High Power as the standard sidearm, the Walther PPK as backup, often in an ankle holster, or as the primary weapon for operators who couldn't conceal the Browning, and HKMP 5K submachine guns. The Q cars, civilian saloons modified with covert radios, hidden video and still cameras, armoured panels with deliberate gaps for firing through, engine cut-off switches and anti-tamper systems, held a Remington 870 shotgun hidden inside. The shotgun had one specific purpose: blast out the windscreen from the inside so operators trapped in a vehicle could engage outward through the opening. The Q car's covert Kevlar armor wasn't a reassurance. It was a reminder of exactly what kind of work this was. After training came a 3-week induction at the assigned detachment. Then the Falls Road, or the lanes around Crossmaglen, or the Bogside, in an unremarkable car with an unremarkable newspaper, watching. The unit divided into 3 detachments, each assigned to a British Army brigade area. North Det covered Belfast, 39 Brigades area. The Falls Road, the Shankill, the Nationalist estates of West Belfast, Turf Lodge, Ballymurphy, Andersonstown. Urban density was simultaneously cover and danger. Operators blended into the foot traffic of streets that had been watching soldiers for years. The IRA maintained its own counter-surveillance infrastructure. Corner boys noting unfamiliar faces and vehicles, women watching from windows in patterns the Provisionals had developed over a decade of confrontation with the security forces. The Falls Road was the most surveilled stretch of road in Britain. The Det's counter was systematic ordinariness. Not soldiers looking like civilians. People so thoroughly unremarkable, selected for it, trained in it, sustained in it by cover stories rehearsed until they became a second nature, that the IRA's surveillance network passed over them. South Det, working out of Bessbrook Mill in County Armagh, covered South Armagh and the border counties. Toby Harnden's Bandit Country, the defining account of South Armagh during the Troubles, describes the landscape and its operational implications as clearly as any document in the public record. The South Armagh Brigade was the most effective and most security-conscious unit in the Provisional movement. It operated in countryside that it had made effectively ungovernable for overt military patrols. Narrow lanes, isolated farmhouses, a civilian population where Republican sympathies ran deep and British Army movements were monitored from the moment a vehicle left the base gates. The Bessbrook helicopter landing site became the primary means of moving troops in the area, precisely because road movement had been made too dangerous. The Det's operators in South Armagh moved, on the ground, in civilian vehicles. In an environment where every unfamiliar face was noted, and where the Irish border, minutes away, meant that if cover broke and a Det operator was taken, no British force could follow across it. That wasn't a theoretical risk. Drumintee was South Armagh. East Det operated in Derry, covering 8 Brigade zone. The Bogside and the Cregan were Republican strongholds with their own dense community surveillance infrastructure, built through years of confrontation dating from the civil rights marches of 1968 and Bloody Sunday of 1972. The first publicly attributable Det casualty operated here. Captain Anthony Pollen, 27 years old, shot dead by the IRA on April 14, 1974, in the Meenan Square area of the city, while conducting covert surveillance during a demonstration. Each detachment ran roughly 20 operators, commanded by a captain with a lieutenant as liaison or operations officer. Support staff included Royal Signals personnel, trained to an intermediate close-quarters battle standard, who maintained surveillance equipment, sometimes in hostile areas. And military intelligence liaison officers, who attended RUC Special Branch and MI5 briefings, and carried that product back into the operational picture. The 3 safe houses in each detachment area, rented rooms in terraced houses, a flat above a shop, a ground-floor maisonette indistinguishable from its neighbours, were the operational centres from which the surveillance cycles ran. The operator went out, watched, came back, filed a report. Went out again the next day in a different car. The same road, the same target, the same corner. weeks at a time. The tedium of the work was the whole point of it. Surveillance that produced operationally significant intelligence was mostly long and uneventful. The dangerous moments were the ones that interrupted the tedium without warning. From 1979, the Tasking and Coordination Group system formalised the command structure for British covert operations in Northern Ireland. 3 TCGs, Belfast, North, South, brought together Army officers, RUC Special Branch, MI5 and SIS in a single coordinating framework. 14 INT co-fed surveillance product upward into that system. The RUC's E4A surveillance unit operated in a parallel lane from the police side. A study of Northern Ireland's security architecture, published in the academic literature, places 14th Intelligence Company and E4A in explicit comparison as the province's 2 primary surveillance units, 1 army, 1 police. The operating model was surveillance to executive action. The DET watched, the SAS acted. The Loughgall ambush of the 8th of May 1987 is the clearest illustration in the public record. The East Tyrone Active Service Unit, 8 strong, was planning to attack the RUC station at Loughgall using a JCB packed with explosives. The intelligence picture that identified the attack, including the surveillance phase confirmed in Sean Hartnett's memoir Charlie 1 and multiple published accounts, came through the intelligence pipeline in the preceding period. The Det built the picture. On the night of the 8th of May, 8 IRA members died in the SAS ambush at the station. The watching had been done weeks and months before. Operation Flavius in Gibraltar in March 1988 followed an identical structure. Det surveillance, SAS executive action, 3 PIRA members killed. The same model operated through the South Armagh sniper campaign of the early 1990s, when a PIRA team conducted a pattern of long-range killings along the border, and British counter-surveillance, drawing on South Det's observation infrastructure, worked to identify the team over months of patient work. The Det was the substrate. It made the visible response possible without itself appearing in any publicly attributable form. The most publicly known member of 14 Intelligence Company was Captain Robert Nairac of the Grenadier Guards, attached to the unit as a liaison officer, number 2 of the 3 Brigade Detachment, operating under the cover designation 4 Field Survey Troop, Royal Engineers, at Castle Dillon in County Armagh. Nairac was born on the 31st of August 1948, the son of an ophthalmic surgeon in Mauritius, then a British Crown colony. He grew up in England, attended Ampleforth College, read medieval and military history at Lincoln College, Oxford, where he boxed and played rugby, and was, by contemporary accounts, exactly the kind of person whose self-confidence habitually outran the situation that was supposed to test it. He was commissioned into the Grenadier Guards, deployed to Northern Ireland in 1973 with the 2nd Battalion, and, unlike most officers who rotated back to their regiment after a standard tour, stayed. He became a liaison officer. South Armagh became his terrain in a way that was unusual for a British officer of his generation, and unusual, some of his colleagues thought, in a more specific sense. The sense that the terrain had become something more than professional. He operated undercover. He visited Republican pubs in South Armagh, singing Irish folk songs in a way that undercover war confirms explicitly. Nairac got up at the 3 Steps Inn at Drominty and sang rebel songs with the locals. Whether this was cover, personal obsession, or both is a question that his contemporaries debated at the time and haven't resolved since. The lines between those possibilities, in his case, appear to have been genuinely blurred, which isn't a quality that made him easy to work with, and not a quality that made what happened next more or less likely. It made it the kind of thing that could happen. On the evening of 14th of May 1977, Nairac signed out of Bessbrook Mill at 21:25, scheduled to return by 23:30. He made 4 radio transmissions at 21:48, 21:52, 21:56 and 21:58, the last confirming he had reached his destination. He drove alone to the 3 Steps Inn at Drominty, a stone-built pub on the Armagh side of the border, close enough to the Republic to be south of any British Army quick reaction force. Inside the pub, he ordered a drink. He sang. The accounts of exactly what happened next are consistent in their outcome and contested in their detail. At some point, his cover broke. The Irish journalist Toby Harnden, in Bandit Country, has documented the South Armagh IRA's pattern of intelligence gathering about security forces personnel. Someone in the pub recognised something, a phrase wrong, a detail that didn't fit, something about the way he held himself that didn't match the cover story. At least 7 men from the Provisional IRA took him outside. His George Cross citation, issued in 1979, states that despite fierce resistance, he was overpowered. He was taken across the border into the Republic of Ireland. He was interrogated. He was killed. His body has never been recovered. Liam Townsend, a known provisional, was convicted of Nairac's murder in 1979. He admitted shooting Nairac at a bridge over the River Flurry. One subsequent account describes Townsend as drunk, having retrieved a .32 revolver from a hiding place in a stone wall, en route to where Nairac was being held. That was the weapon. That was enough. The George Cross was awarded posthumously on the 13th of February 1979, published in the London Gazette. The citation identifies Nairac not as a 14 Intelligence Company operator, but as an officer of the Grenadier Guards, Army No. 493007, serving as a liaison officer at Headquarters 3 Infantry Brigade, engaged in a task connected with surveillance operations. The security architecture that defined his operational life operated even in his formal commemoration. The army that sent him to South Armagh acknowledged him as a guardsman. The question of where his body is hasn't been answered in 48 years. The Independent Commission for the Location of Victims' Remains has his case. In August 2024, the ICLVR conducted a search in County Louth, ending without result. A former prisoner had provided information. One account suggests those who abducted Nairac may have included IRA sympathisers rather than formal members, which has complicated the information trail. The family has continued searching. As of 2026, nothing has been recovered. Nairac is the face of the DET in the public record. The George Cross made him nationally known, and the missing body has sustained attention across decades in a way that a confirmed burial wouldn't have. His case matters to this script's argument in one specific structural respect. The most formally honoured death in the unit's history was attributed, in the London Gazette, to a regiment. The security system didn't make an exception for the occasion of his commemoration. It continued doing exactly what it was designed to do. The documented casualty record of 14 Intelligence Company runs from 1974 to the unit's final operational years. Captain Anthony Pollan, 27 years old, was shot dead by the IRA on April 14, 1974, in the Meenan Square area of Derry, while conducting covert surveillance during a Republican demonstration. He is the earliest confirmed named loss in the documentary record. 2 years later, on March 17, 1976, Lance Corporal David Jones, 23, died in a firefight near Nairac in County Londonderry. Lance Corporal Alan Swift, 25 years old, was killed on the 11th of August 1977 on the Letterkenny Road in Derry. The Wikipedia timeline of British undercover forces in Operation Banner notes specifically that Swift's death was the first time the IRA had carried out a targeted assassination against an operator. The phrase implies that Pollen, Jones, and the others who died before Swift had fallen in firefights or other circumstances where the IRA had not deliberately set out to kill a known DET member. Swift's killing marked a new stage in the operational competition. The Provisional IRA had identified that the DET existed, understood something of how it worked, and was now targeting its people directly. On the 14th of December, Corporal Paul Harmon was shot dead by an IRA sniper while undercover in West Belfast. He was 27 years old, service number 24302090. The location given in multiple accounts is Mona Avenue in the Turf Lodge area. The same ground, Undercover War notes, as the MRF shooting of Patrick McVeigh in May 1972. The same conflict, the same streets, 5 years and 2 completely different military formations later. Intelligence Corps records cited in a memorial account confirm that Harmon was the only member of that corps to be killed in action during the Northern Ireland operations. With Nairac's death in May 1977, Swift's death in August, and Harmon's death in December, the unit endured a devastating sequence of losses across that period. The first week of May 1980 brought a casualty from the adjacent operational world. On the 2nd of May, Captain Herbert Westmacott of the Grenadier Guards, attached to G Squadron of 22 SAS, led a plainclothes 8-man patrol responding to intelligence about an IRA unit occupying a house on the Antrim Road in North Belfast. The IRA unit inside the house, the M60 gang, the Belfast Brigade team that had been using a stolen American machine gun, opened fire from an upstairs window as the patrol approached. Westmacott was killed instantly, struck in the head and shoulder. He was 28 years old. Every source confirms his SAS attachment at the time of his death, not 14 Intelligence Company. He was, the public record states, the highest-ranking SAS officer to die in Northern Ireland during Operation Banner. He matters to this story because of what his case illustrates about the architecture, not because he was a DET operator. The M60 gang was one of the targets that the broader intelligence picture, the TCG system, RUC special branch product, and long-running surveillance work had been building toward. The SAS acted when the intelligence warranted action. Westmacott was the executive end of a pipeline. The confusion between units in the public record isn't accidental. When deaths occurred at the SAS-14 INT-CO interface, the attribution often reflected whatever cover was most publicly defensible, rather than the precise operational facts. The Ministry of Defence, as recently as 2019, was withholding the citation relating to Westmacott's military cross on public interest grounds. The official information around his death remained restricted 40 years after it occurred. In August 1981, South Armagh, a surveillance vehicle was ambushed by a Provisional IRA active service unit. Among the casualties was a member of the WRAC. Det academic work on British servicewomen during the Troubles, the 2024 and 2025 papers, specifically focused on covert female operators in Northern Ireland, is working toward a complete scholarly record of this period. The headstone does not say 14 Intelligence Company. It says what the security architecture permitted it to say: the regiment, the rank, the name. The same rule applied without exception, regardless of gender. The double invisibility. Undetected in life because the IRA wasn't anticipating female operators. Unattributed in death because the unit's designation couldn't appear in the public record, is precisely the pattern the security architecture produced. The acknowledged public record of 14 intelligence company deaths is partial by structural design. Mark Urban, in Big Boys Rules in 1992, documented approximately 12 deaths to that point, with the figure updated in his subsequent reporting to a total of roughly 14 across the unit's full operational life. That total has never been formally confirmed by the Ministry of Defence. No such formal confirmation was possible under the same logic that made DEFE 25/280 name no unit. To confirm a death as attributable to 14 intelligence company, the Ministry would need to officially confirm that 14 intelligence company was the formation where the operator was serving. The founding instruction had specifically not done that. The mechanism is documented in specific cases. Operators attached to cover formations had their deaths attributed to those formations. Nairac's George Cross citation names the Grenadier Guards. The parliamentary response about 4 Field Survey Troop at Castle Dillon, the cover designation for the 3 Brigade detachment, confirmed the unit's presence and then added that detailed information on this unit, which isn't now deployed in the province, is no longer available. Deaths registered to a formation that officially wasn't on the order of battle were, institutionally, as invisible as the men who carried its name. The Special Forces Roll of Honour maintains a dedicated section for the 14th Intelligence Company. The entries that exist confirm what the public record has accumulated. Harmon, Swift, others. The full casualty list hasn't been publicly released. The number of operators whose deaths remain officially unattributed to the detachment, officially attributed instead to the cover formation they were wearing when they died, is a figure that emerges from the accumulated secondary record rather than from any MOD acknowledgement. The women of the WRAC debt are the most acute instance of this problem. Frontline conditions, documented casualties, and a security architecture that didn't distinguish between genders when applying the rule that no operator's death could name the unit they were actually serving. The academic literature is beginning to recover their record. The official record, as of 2026, hasn't kept pace. Corporal Paul Harmon's regimental connection gave the Intelligence Corps its only acknowledged Northern Ireland killed in action. Captain Anthony Pollan was a Grenadier Guards officer. The cover names on the headstones told the regiment's story. The debt story was never supposed to be told in stone. When the first IRA ceasefire was called in July 1997, 14 Intelligence Company was dissolved. The exact month isn't confirmed in the available declassified record. The causal relationship between the ceasefire and the dissolution is documented nowhere in what has been released. The coincidence is real and the inference reasonable, but the formal rationale hasn't been confirmed. Whether dissolution was a political concession within the peace process, a rationalization of the security apparatus, or the recognition that the operational environment had changed beyond the unit's founding mandate, is, in the available record, unknown. The functions continued. The specific arrangements in the 8 years between the unit's 1997 dissolution and the Special Reconnaissance Regiment's establishment on April 6, 2005, aren't accounted for in what has been declassified. The SRR's Wikipedia entry states that the regiment was formed around a core of the already established 14 Intelligence Company, which played a similar role against the Provisional IRA in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. A 2016 ETH Zurich briefing paper on UK Special Forces accountability confirms the SRR developed from 14 Intelligence Company established in 1973. The functional inheritance is documented consistently across multiple sources. What the SRR's own establishment documents don't contain is a formal claim of 14 INTCO's lineage. The institutional silence about the parent unit's existence, consistent from the October 1973 instruction onwards, extended into the successor's founding papers. The Legacy Disclosure Programme, ongoing as of 2026, is working through the partial releases from that period. What it may eventually confirm about the unit's full death toll, and the gap between what appears in regimental records and what is known to those who served, is still ahead. The unit's insignia, reproduced on unofficial mess plaques and in published accounts by former operators, depicts Argus Panoptes, the giant of Greek mythology whose name in ancient Greek translates as all-seeing. He had 100 eyes, so many that few slept at once, making him permanently alert. When Hermes killed him, his eyes were transferred to the peacock's tail feathers. Total surveillance, operated invisibly by an organization that officially didn't exist. The insignia isn't subtle. The unit that designed it understood exactly what it was. The unit's motto, as recorded in the culture of former operators and on the elite UK forces reference that compiled post-service accounts, "Quietly, we do our work." At Hereford Cathedral, among the names inscribed on the SAS memorial, there are believed to be men who were 14 Intelligence Company operators at the time of their deaths. Individuals whose deaths were attributed to the SAS or to their parent regiments, because the unit they were actually serving couldn't be publicly named. The specific identification of those names isn't confirmed in the unclassified record. The memorial holds what it holds. Each November, a gathering of former DTET operators marks the year's end in Hereford. No official ceremony, no Ministry of Defence acknowledgement of what the gathering represents. The people who are in the detachment know who they are. Some of them know which names on that memorial belong to colleagues rather than to the regiment whose badge is carved beside them. The corporal on the Falls Road in March 1981 returned to base, developed his film, wrote his report. He drove back out the following morning in a different car. He served his tour and returned to his regiment. If he had died on that street, if the IRA in the upstairs window had noticed the man reading racing pages for 17 minutes outside a betting shop and put the correct interpretation on it, his death certificate wouldn't have said 14 Intelligence Company. It would have said what the security architecture required it to say. The same thing it said for Nairac. The same thing it said for Harman, for Swift, for Pollen, for Jones. The same thing it said for the woman whose headstone, in whatever county churchyard it stands in, names the regiment and does not name the detachment. The document that created the unit on October 12, 1973, named nothing. That was the point. 24 years of operations, 14 operators dead by the most careful accounting available. A covert surveillance capability that fed the intelligence substrate beneath every major British counter-terrorism success in Northern Ireland. And the founding instruction that authorised all of it left no name for the ledger. Quietly, they did their work. Subscribe for more stories like this.